I found it much easier to be extraordinarily raw and vulnerable in front of thousands of strangers on stage than I did with my most intimate relationships.
Yeah.
Gabrielle Bernstein, a role model for spiritual seekers.
All right, guys, this is such a
No small
selfish.
talk.
There's no small talk. Zero. It's called big talk. Dear Gabby, big talk. No
Big talk.
effing small talk. And if you start going into small talk, I'm going to call you the and I'm just kidding. You'll see. I'll just redirect you.
Gabby, Jay and I, every time we meet, which is like every couple weeks here in LA, we go right into the first thing we say is, I miss you. I love you, Jay. Why are we here?
Right.
What's the reason of this life? How can I be more spiritual? There's always, and then we just speak for 6 hours about all these different topics, and we don't know what small talk is. So
I don't know if I have 6 hours, but I have some time to be with you
Yes.
and go there. And those are the only conversations I want to have. And the sort of conversation part of this show is strictly that, just going right in, going right for what's real, what's up with us, what's meaningful, what's tough. Because personally, I don't think I got any more time for small talk in general. And if I'm going to publicize a conversation, it better be deep. Okay. So here we are. I just want to open by saying that the two of you, while you may be younger than I am, are kind of like big brothers to me. And you both have very meaningful places for me in my heart. I want to acknowledge Jay. From the moment that I met you, you were interviewing me. I was a little late for the interview. It was a Universe Has Your Back interview. My publicist was like, he's really cute. That's what she said to me. And I was like, okay. And I show up and you have these like piercing blue eyes and you're just such a beam of light. And the immediate conversation was so comfortable, so natural, and you made me feel so safe. And I walked out of there and I was like, I want to do more with that man. I want to do as much as I want to collaborate with him as much as possible. And I was like, he's a superstar. Hence, here you are, superstar. Now, Lewis, it's quite the same. Was just love, friendship at first sight. And one of the most meaningful moments in my life was shared with you. And I don't know, you know this, but I don't know how much you've heard me say it to you directly. And I'm looking you in the eye while I say it. But the day that I acknowledged publicly that I had been sexually abused as a child, which was probably one of the most difficult things I could bring out into the world, was on your show. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't expecting to talk about it. And the only reason I could was because of your vulnerability and your truth and how safe you made me feel. Mm-hmm. So the through line here is not just that you guys are both awesome, not that you are both amazing mentors to me, podcast mentors to me, big brothers to me, even though you're younger, but you both have this beautiful innate ability to make people feel safe. I want to start there. What does it mean to you, and whoever wants to start, to feel safe in your own body, to feel safe in your life? Go for it.
I was just actually with Jay last night talking about this, how I feel like I've learned how to keep myself safe physically from like playing sports. I grew up not feeling safe, so I said, how do I get bigger, faster, stronger so I can feel safe when I'm walking down the street and there's someone around me? I feel like I can physically protect myself. I feel like I could handle my situation or my environment. If I'm in a crowded area and something happens, I could protect or defend myself. That was something that became easy for me because it's something I knew well to do through sports. The challenging thing for me that took me a long time to learn, which I've talked to Jay about this many times over the last 4 years, was how to emotionally feel safe with myself in intimate relationships, not in friendships or in business relationships, or in family necessarily, but more intimate relationships. And for many years of my life, I wasn't safe because I continued to abandon my inner child. I continued to abandon the 5-year-old that was sexually abused, the needs that he had in the moments as an adult. And it wasn't really until recently, until early, 7, 8 months ago, where I learned to become emotionally safe for myself and not abandon the things that I needed to fully love myself and feel protected emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And it's crazy to think that it took me 38 years to learn that healing integration process of feeling emotionally safe and intimacy. Again, physically safe, I've done that my entire life because that's what I did to protect myself originally from feeling emotionally abandoned. But the emotional safety, I needed to learn how to heal the memories of the past, those feelings, that experience, and really start integrating through daily practices, which was scary to do, but now feels so freeing on the other side. And this is something I talk about with Jay all the time was how to get to that place. And Jay really guided me in the journey as well.
Well, your awareness of that is actually the first step to safety, to recognize and identify, okay, my child part is activated and dissociated in these experiences. That awareness and ability to speak that truth is actually one of the most massive steps towards safety, because then allows your adult part to bring him back to safety, right? I'm blown away. And also, it took me 41 years to figure that out, to get to that place. So 38, nice job. Nice job.
Yeah, and it's something I was showing Jay this last night, but for those not watching, if you're just listening to this, there's a photo on my phone of my 5-year-old self, or maybe I was like 6, but of that child that felt unsafe.
That's right.
And I have a conversation every time I pick up my phone, I see this photo and I have a conversation with, little Lewis, or the child that felt unsafe emotionally in an unstable environment. And I say, hey, I'm here for you now. I've got your back. I'm doing the things that you needed then, now. I'm not going to abandon us anymore. I'm going to show up for you in a loving way. I'm going to give you the hug when you need the hug. I'm going to give you the pep talk when you need it. And I'm letting you know that you're emotionally and physically and spiritually safe now, because I'm not abandoning you anymore. And I'm kind of emotional just saying it to myself right now, because for so long, that's what I did. I was abandoning myself in certain situations, not every situation, but in certain situations. And it manifested in a lot of negative emotions, not feeling peace, emotional suffering, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's probably why I've been on a journey for the last 8 years of seeking, wisdom on how to find that inner peace, because there's always a part of me that kind of had like some lingering suffering, and I wasn't sure how to fully let that go. And I'm sure the rest of my life I'll always be integrating healing, because it's not a one-time event. It's a consistent journey, as you know, Gabby, but it just feels good to have the awareness and the tools to integrate it when I feel like a little off at times.
And I just want to say one more thing before Jay goes. The biggest tool that you have now in your toolbox is your access to self energy, which you could call Big Lewis, adult resourced self energy, and your ability to let him step in and care for little Lewis is the key to recovery. You literally nailed it. Like, it's everything, because as long as you can come back to Big Lewis, adult self resourced Lewis, you are never unsafe.
Right. Yeah. Feels good. It's like I have a bodyguard always protecting
That's beautiful.
My inner child, like physically and spiritually. Let's go, world.
That's right. I got you. I want to speak to more of that later, but I'm excited to hear from Jay. So what makes you feel safe, baby?
Yeah, I want to thank you as well, Gabby, and thank Lewis for doing this together, and obviously Gabby for reaching out. And what you said was so true. I felt the same thing, and we ended up doing so many interviews together, and you'd always be one call away. And, I grew up at a time where I was watching you and Lewis just have such an incredible impact on the world. You guys have paved the way. You're trailblazers. You're both change makers doing so much incredible work. And so I was so grateful that when you went from being people that inspired me to people that were my friends, and that you were even better in person and even more loving and kind on a call. And so I just want to say, for everyone who wants to meet you both, that I can definitely say, as someone who started off as a fan and now is still a fan, but your friend, I would say that, both of you are just even more wonderful in person. I'm so grateful that I get to experience that. So thank you so much. I feel safe. You said to go deep, so I'm not going to hold back. I feel safe when I'm in alignment with my divine service. So when I feel like I'm serving, when I feel that I'm surrendering to divine will or divine guidance, I feel safe when I realize that actually everything that's happening around me, that's not real. Like, that's not really what's going on. It's about how I respond. It's about how I live and navigate the challenges and the stress and the pressure that comes. And what's truly real is how I serve, how I live, how I try to support others. And I do feel safety in service. I feel whenever there's uncertainty in life, whenever there are challenges in life, I gravitate towards service and seeing how I can serve myself and others with their supreme good, because I just feel that that's connecting me back to my source. That's connecting me back to exactly what I'm meant to be doing. There's many ways I could protect myself or hope that I feel safe because I've created enough strength or wealth or support or network or all of that stuff that we all know that ultimately that all fades away. And when I looked at my friend, I recently lost my friend. He was my best friend when I was a monk. He was like a brother to me. He was still a monk when he passed away. And we only had a couple of years different. He was 35 years old when he passed away a month ago.
Sorry.
And no, and actually the thing was, thank you, Gabby, but also the thing was with him is that he, you know, we teach people how to live, and he was showing me how to die. And I got to speak to him 3 days before he passed away, not knowing that he only had 3 days left. I thought maybe he had 3 months. And I spoke to him, and he was beaming and he was laughing and he was emaciated, but I could see his teeth wide and bright. And he was just ready for what was coming. And I realized that he felt safe because he felt divine protection at that time. And that's when nothing else mattered. Nothing, no one that he'd met, nothing that he'd lived, nothing that he'd accomplished or achieved, none of that made him feel safe. What made him feel safe is that he felt he had divine shelter. And so when you asked us to go deep and big, sorry, I had to dive in, but
I don't apologize to me. I
so-
like it. I love it.
yeah, I'd say that's what it is for me. And I saw that in him. I saw that he felt safe at the most difficult time in life.
Interestingly, both of your answers are actually the same, because that connection to resourced self is a connection to divine wisdom, divine truth. It's comparable in my language, in my perception, it's comparable to feeling the connection to higher power. It's not just, oh, Lewis, the ego human, like his perception of himself. It's his inner strength and wisdom. And so I believe that would be the same definition of a God or a higher power or a divine. That's just, again, my interpretation. And just be careful, because I'm going to just keep dear Gabbying the out of both of you, because this is what I do, and pointing things out that I identify. But it was interesting because I was listening to your podcast, Jay, you did a whole episode on attachment styles. And I was really fast. I knew exactly what I was. I mean, I was like all the way through just this totally anxious, attached person. I knew it was an insecure attachment. And frankly, I was kind of answering the questions because you did a whole series of questions to help us find out our attachment style. Beautiful episode. But I was really curious about what you would come back with. And I had a sense that you were going to be a securely attached person. And you are. And then when I asked you this question, I was like, how does a securely attached person answer that question? And that it makes a lot of sense now that this would be your response.
Good to know. Yeah, there's a great book, if anyone hasn't read it, by, I think it's Amir Levine
Attached.
and Rachel Heller, and it's called Attached. It's a fantastic book that I use as the basis of that episode. Yeah, really good book.
Really good book. And it's funny because, my attachment style it has been an anxious attachment style. So one of the reasons why I feel so safe with both of you is because I feel so seen by both of you, genuinely seen, not seen like, oh, Gabby, we love you, but seen in the sense of some people that could hold me in all that I am and really genuinely present with me. That makes me feel safe.
I love that. And yeah, Gabby, to be honest as well, there was a big chunk of my life that I would have considered myself avoidant. So for anyone who's listening, just to simplify, you're either anxious, avoidant, or secure. And you'll find that those are quite evenly split. And most people spend obviously more of their life in anxious and avoidant. And a big part of that is our relationship with our parents, our first loves, and other relationships we've had. So for a big part of my life, I would say I was actually avoidant because that was the atmosphere that I was raised in.
Right.
And so it took me a long time to move towards secure. And I still feel that we're always on a spectrum and you're just trying to move closer to being secure. You're never truly fully secure. You're always somewhere on the pendulum swing in the spectrum. And so just to clarify that too, that I also started out as avoidant and have tried to healthily move towards secure.
I agree. I think that when I was answering the questions, I was answering them based on sort of the knee-jerk reactions, but I know that security is so much stronger than it ever was. I really believe that. Okay, we're going for it, guys. Well, let's talk now about both of you have this beautiful ability to be vulnerable, which as men isn't always that simple, isn't always that easily, particularly men in the public eye. I just really want to acknowledge that I think it's what people fall in love with most in any human is their ability to be authentically vulnerable and truthful. So what does it mean to you to be vulnerable? And when do you know that you're really allowing that to come through?
I'll go first this time, Lewis. You can get more time to think this time because you bailed me out on the last one. So yeah, and I really admire this about Lewis too. And he said like we were together last night and we've been hanging out a lot lately again. So it's been a lot of fun. But for me, vulnerability is really interesting because one of the loving exchanges in the tradition I lived in as a monk, there's 6 loving exchanges. They are giving and receiving gifts. It's giving and receiving food. And then the last 2 are giving and receiving confidential, vulnerable information. So actually one of the loving exchanges in spiritual culture is to give and receive vulnerably. And to experience that from someone else. So for me, vulnerability has always been about opening up to someone that you believe can support, help, encourage, guide, steer you in a journey and a direction that's going to better your life. And so I do often, to be quite honest, reflect on today's definition of vulnerability, where it's like everyone's just like, well, tell Instagram, or you have to tell Facebook, or you have to tell everyone. And that to me, I don't count that as a definition of vulnerability. I count that as a degree of vulnerability that you open yourself up to based on who you want to share things with. But I think vulnerability is sharing with someone who is worthy of what you're trying to share. Mm-hmm. And where you feel, as you've said many times in this conversation, where you feel that sense of safety and confidentiality and trust. So to me, vulnerability is sharing and listening with trust. And sometimes that happens on a mass scale, and sometimes it happens in a small, intimate way. And I think there are things about all of us that we would say everyone knows, and there are things about all of us that only one person knows. And there's beauty in that as much as there is in the scale. And so to me, vulnerability is really being careful and being conscious about who we share what with, because that's what vulnerability is. It's that subtlety of how we share, who we share, why we share. The question about why we share is so important, right? Vulnerability is about why we share. Are we sharing because we want to create a connection, because we want to open up so that we can let go of some baggage? Or are we sharing because we want to be perceived in certain ways? So for me, vulnerability is everything about why we share, how we share, who we share it with, and what we share.
Yeah, totally. And I want, before even Lewis, you say anything, I want to, first of all, that was beautiful. And I acknowledge that when we're vulnerable in public, it's extremely different than being vulnerable in an intimate relationship. So this is where I want to tee you up, Lewis, because I found, and we have a similar history of childhood abuse and trauma, and that trauma sending us into these very scared places. I found it much easier to be extraordinarily raw and vulnerable in front of thousands of strangers on stage than I did with my most intimate relationships.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's been your experience, but tell us what yours has been.
Wow.
Yeah, for me, I never shared anything vulnerable for most of my life until probably 30, around there. Uh, every time something would come up, especially speaking about the sexual abuse stuff, like every time something would come up where family would ask me something, or a girlfriend would ask me, like, why are you this way? Why do you react in this way? Why do you get angry when this happens? Why do you try to defend yourself when someone you take something personally from someone? Why do you act this way? And I only gave them surface levels responses. I didn't actually like allow myself to be like, well, this happened and this happened. And I just never thought that was a possibility, because I just thought it was weakness. I never saw something, a model or an example like that from peers, kids, people that I had growing up with. I don't want to say never and always, but I don't remember seeing a model like that. Um, and in fact, when anyone shared a shred of vulnerability in terms of like peers, schoolmates, athlete teammates, when they showed a little bit of vulnerability, it was almost like they were shamed and bullied and made fun of.
Yeah.
And so in a world where, specifically me, I just wanted to belong as a kid because I didn't feel like I had many friends. I just wanted to, oh, I have a few people that want to hang out with me. Great. I don't want to do anything that'll make them push me away. And so when I would witness that, I would just be like, well, I'm never going to share these things. If I'm going to get laughed at and, made fun of and pushed out of the friend group or whatever. And it wasn't until I went to a workshop where I actually opened up about sexual abuse a little over 8 years ago. And I remember feeling like my life is over. Like I just shared this thing, but no one knew who I was, but I felt like my life is over. This whole room is going to judge me. I'm not going back in the room. It took like 7 days for me to actually open up about it in this kind of emotional intelligence training. And one of the most beautiful things that happened probably in my life was I ran out of the room after talking about sexual abuse for the first time, a 30-year-old man, to this group of maybe 40 strangers. And I was like, I'm not going back in. And probably 5 minutes later, one by one, all the men in the room came out and gave me a hug and looked me in the eyes and were like, you're my hero. I trust you more than ever. Like I always, I liked you before, but now I'll do whatever, anything you say, I'm here for you. And I was like, what? It kind of took me back, because these are grown men. Most of them were older than me. That were coming up, hugging me, some of them crying. And then some of them opening up and saying, there was a guy who was like 58 years old who was like, I've been married for 20-something years. I've got 4 kids. My wife and my kids don't know. This happened to me when I was 11.
Yeah.
Another guy came up and said something similar, and I was just like, first off, I'm overwhelmed because I just shared something vulnerable. Then I'm hearing other men open up, which I'd never heard other men talk like this.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what is this? What is this? Now I thought maybe this is just because we're in a safe environment and this is a workshop and people feel like they can do this, but they can't do this out in the real world, right? And I remember thinking for a couple of months after this, like, could I actually share this with my family and my friends? Could they know this about me? Or would my life really be over and they'd all not want to speak to me again? And I remember working with some therapists at the time, and one of them, I said, if I was going to have the courage to speak to my family about this, or a friend, how would I even set up the context? How would the conversation begin? And this one therapist said, ask the question to each family member first, is there anything I could ever say or do that would make you not love me? then wait to see how they respond. If they say yes, lots of things, then maybe don't tell them. Maybe they're not ready to hear it. But if they respond in a way that makes you feel seen and safe and open, then feel free to share. And so I did that with all of my family members, my siblings, and my mom. And I called each one of them terrified and said, "Is there anything? I've got something I want to share with you. I'm a little scared and a little nervous. But before I share with you, is there anything that I could ever say or do that would make you not love me?" And each one of them said, "Absolutely not." Especially my brother right away. Like before I could even finish the sentence, he was like, "Absolutely not." And the reason he said that is because he went to prison when he was younger for 4.5 years. And I think he felt a lot of shame. So he was like, "I've done the worst thing, the most shameful thing in the family. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. I'm always going to love you. I may be, sad for you, or I may be, disappointed, but I'm always going to love you." And that was what I needed to hear for me to feel safe and seen, to be able to share vulnerably. And when I shared with each one of them, I did it in a private one-on-one conversation with each one of them. When I did that, it was almost like our relationship transcended to another level, each one of them, because they heard something that they'd never heard from me, like Jay was sharing, and each one of them shared something vulnerable in return. I didn't ask them to. They were just like, when I was 16, something, this happened to me. When I was 21, I was dealing with something with this relationship, and it made me feel super insecure and shameful about it. And we had a conversation, a give and take of vulnerable intimacy that I was like, wow, I respect you. I love you more. Like, I have this deeper connection and relationship now. And the more that I started to implement this conversation by asking friends and going through, I was like, okay, my family has to love me no matter what I say, but will my friends accept me? So there's layers of levels of fear and insecurity of like who you reveal, I guess, this to. And so I started to share this with some of my closest friends because I felt like I wanted my friends to know who I was and to know like the thing I was most ashamed of, because I felt like I was holding back. I felt like I was not lying necessarily, but like not revealing myself fully.
Yep.
And I felt like I just wanted people to know. And I also wanted them to know because I was afraid. I was still afraid that if people knew, maybe they wouldn't love me. And I didn't want to live in fear anymore. So I started telling friends one by one. And then I remember saying like, okay, I feel good. My friends still love me. And if not, I'm stronger. My family loves me, if not stronger. And I felt like because I started building this platform, I was like, man, I probably need to do this because I'm afraid of what people think of me still, like my audience. And so that's when I started to talk about it more publicly, because I felt like, from all the boys, for me growing up, I didn't see a model of a guy that looked like me, who was a former athlete, tall Midwest guy talking about these things.
Yeah.
And I felt like this was an opportunity to hopefully help other men who felt like they could never share even with their spouse for decades.
Yeah.
And so that's why I decided to do it. And it helped me overcome my fear, and it helped me feel like more connected. And I've always felt since then that the key to fulfillment in life is within the relationships you have, the relationship with yourself and other people. And the key to those fulfilling relationships is vulnerability.
I just want to acknowledge your bravery to speak about it, because 1 in 4 people are sexually abused, but it's very difficult for men to speak out about that kind of trauma. And it's men like you, like Dax Shepard, like Tim Ferriss, I want to shout out that podcast that he did, and having the ability to be that vulnerable publicly as a man is a different thing. I really want to acknowledge that, because when I started telling my friends about what happened to me, I kid you not, every single one of them said me too.
Wow.
Not one of my female friends that I revealed my sexual trauma to did not have a story of their own. Not one. And you know, of course, as I started to tell the story further and further and further, then there were some friends that, but every friend had some experience in some way. Maybe it wasn't exactly like mine. So I find that while that's horrific, it's much more socially acceptable for a woman to come out about this stuff, particularly now.
Right.
And it's also more socially acceptable for men to come out and speak up about these things now. So it's a beautiful, beautiful world that we're living in, that this is becoming something that is so honored and held in our society. But I just want to give you a big shout out for that bravery and acknowledge that what you've done is also given so many other men permission to speak up and tell their truth as well.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
you know, it's 1 in 4 women and then 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused. There's a great resource, oneinsix.org, for men on how to really
Great.
open up and communicate and do all these things. So oneinsix.org. It's a
Great
resource.
Beautiful. And you know what? It's probably more.
Oh, yeah.
Probably more. A lot of people that listen to this show have trauma that they've come to not necessarily come here for the therapeutic support. They need to do that with their therapist, but they come here to remember they're not alone in it. And just being able to give voice to it naturally is such a blessing for somebody who's been through that kind of hell and back. If you like this video and you want to get more Gabby, check out the next one right over here.